Hey, I'm back, and it's spooky season. I was gonna have something spooky to show you this episode, but unfortunately my spook dealer was out of town, so you'll just have to make do with this new background. I hope you can project your own fears onto it. Before we get into the juicy content, I want to highlight a comment I got on my last video. Jared7650 suggested that I use the 2D lighting effects to try and improve the mood and make it more spooky. I looked into it, and it's pretty cool. I intend to use it, so thanks for the suggestion. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get into the episode. To start things off, I spent a lot of time trying to redesign the player in a way that was easier to work with, and that looked better. Most of this process I decided not to show because it was pointless since I threw it all out, so you're seeing the finished product. I based the run animation off of Nuclear Thrones.
Nuclear! What's that? Sorry.
Because I thought making only one single animation would be nice and easy. Also, I found a great blog post showing me how they went about it. I wanted the character's shirt to match his headband, but then he ends up looking like a minion, so I had to go with a burnt yellow instead.
Oh no! Anyway,
after thinking about it for a bit, I realized I could probably just duplicate the existing tile map and it would allow me to stack tiles on top of each other, and as a result, save me a lot of work when making new tiles. I realize this is probably obvious to almost anyone who's worked with them before, but this is my first time, so it's all new to me. Now that I could double up on tiles, I remade the collision shapes, and in the process figured out how to adjust the grid snapping distance so I could get an accurate placement of vertices. I realize I may have people watching these devlogs who don't really know what I'm talking about, so when possible, for more technical concepts, I'll try and explain them. Oh look, there's a good opportunity right now. A collision shape is a defined area that can be used to restrict access to that area, or as a way to detect the presence of an object within that area. In this case, I use them to keep the player, and also the creatures, from escaping into the infinite void / the backrooms. I also use collision shapes later to detect the presence of the player character for the creatures. That was all done while I was editing the first video because I need something different to do periodically or else I go crazy. Everything from here on out, though, is post-first devlog release, so I start getting more ambitious. Taking the knowledge that I can overlay multiple tiles now, I decided to have some fun and spent one morning making a bunch of details to enrich the environment. I looked up some pictures of various electrical boxes and panels and stuff and just kind of reinterpreted them. When I eventually get to making interactable tiles, I want to have some of these do stuff, like maybe contain items or activate secret doors. But for now, they're just some decorations. I had the most fun with the graffiti. I'm a huge fan of Mystery Science Theater 3000, so I had to throw in some references to the Hover Mothers and the Cro-Magnons. Of course, the obligatory warning about the lizard people living in the sewers. I'm going to need a bunch more of these, but I probably won't showcase making them in future episodes, unless I need some B-roll while I'm talking about something else.
purple guy!
I was even thinking people could share designs on Twitter and I'd add them into the game. I think that would be some fun community participation. Anyway, after that, I repainted the door I'd brought over from the old tile map since it was actually really well made. I matched the door color to the player's headband to create a subconscious link, since it's the door to the safe room. Kinda like in Left 4 Dead, but I think these rooms will be functionally more like the benches from Hollow Knight. After that, I just placed some of the detailed decorations in the map real quick. The alignment is a little off, but that gets fixed later. So remember how I redesigned the player and made 2 animations for right and left? Well, I realized I could make it even easier on myself and actually just better in general if I had one single running animation that played when any movement was pressed, and then just flip the animation direction of the sprite using the flip H command, according to whether you hit the right or left movement inputs. I know, right? It's super revolutionary and I'm trying to get it patented. But seriously, I'm pretty happy with this because I felt comfortable enough with GD script that I was able to come up with and implement this all on my own. And it works pretty well. It was exciting because it felt like I was starting to get the hang of things. Also, I changed the collision shape for the player to a capsule. The player used to get stuck if you were just barely not lined up correctly with a wall, and the capsule shape fixes that by allowing you to slide around edges if you're close enough. Plus, it better approximates a body with shoulders anyway. You may have wondered why I called the rats creatures instead of just rats, or even enemies. Well, it's because I wanted a generic base for all the other entities in the game, including ones that aren't actually hostile. So I made a base character body 2D and called it Creature because I couldn't think of a better name. I just gave it the rat sprite for the time being since I had animations for it. I also think it's kind of funny to use a generic term for what's clearly a rat. Maybe I'm just weird though. Anyway, I'm still kind of unsure how to do what would be considered a prefab variant in Unity within Godot. But I still wanted to try and hopefully minimize the amount of work I'd have to do when I start making different creature types. We'll see how that works out though. I first set up an area 2D for detecting the player and then gave the creature a collision shape so it won't phase through walls. All this was pretty straightforward, but I started to run into problems as I tried to implement the chase behavior. Basically, most creatures will chase you once you have entered their detection zone. It's not a complicated thing to do really, but being unfamiliar with how GD script does things sometimes slows my progress significantly. This gets even worse later, but I'll save you the boredom of watching me just stare at my screen for like 30 minutes at a time while I try to figure out what I did wrong. Speaking of how Godot does things, this brings me to the first big thing I learned about this episode. Signals. Signals are basically events that belong to a node, in my case an area 2D node. You attach a signal to a script in the editor and that creates a method that is called whenever that event fires. It's almost exactly like how WinForms work in Visual Studio, but it's very different to how Unity works. In Unity this would be done with a Unity event that you subscribe to, but you don't really need to do that for most basic things like collision events. Unity just calls the onCollision methods for you in the parent script if any of the children of the game object collide with something. So despite having experience with WinForms, I wasn't thinking of it that way, and it took a little while to grasp the concept. At this point, I had decided that the tutorial I had been using wasn't working for me, so I decided to just write my own solution to dealing and taking damage. Basically, the way it works is both the player and creatures have a health value, and they both have methods that allow them to deal damage and to take damage. The difference though is that the player hits everything in his weapon's collision shape, but the creatures only attack their chase target. I'm not going to really go in depth on my implementation because it's really not great. It does work though, but I'll have to revise it as I learn how to better structure my code and have different scripts talk to each other in Godot. Finally, now that I had a combat system working, I figured I'd throw in a quick little spawner so I could sit there and fight a steady stream of rats without having to restart constantly. As it turns out, it wasn't as quick as I would have hoped. I started out by making a grate to signify a spawner, but then got distracted and made some more art, including some tiles to fix the gaps in the tile map. The spawner is theoretically pretty simple, as most things have been so far, but learning how Godot handles creating instances of scenes and handling not spawning too many creatures at once, or on top of each other, took me some time. I also got bit by Godot 3 and 4 differences for the first time when creating new instances of the rats. As it turns out, the 3.0 command is instance, but the 4.0 command is the more familiar for Unity users instantiate. An easy fix, but a reminder to make sure I'm looking at the right documentation. It did make me miss my IDE telling me things like, this isn't a valid command, or this is depreciated, use the other thing instead. I'm just a little spoiled, I guess. The final major thing I did was set up a random wandering behavior for the rats. Again, it should have been a really simple thing to implement, but I wasted a lot of time because I forgot to set the initial location of the rat to where it spawns. so it was constantly running to the center of the world, and it took me way too long to realize that. That's just a classic programming blunder though, nothing to do with Godot. Well, anyway, that was the second episode. We now have something that would almost be considered a game in 1976. I hope you liked it. I think the next episode will see me expanding on the combat system, implementing actual weapons and more creatures, and giving them different behaviors, but I don't really have all these planned out exactly yet. In other news, I've also posted the first of what I'm calling Real Chimes long plays, an hour of a preset on Real Chimes that you can check out if you're interested. I also have plans to release a small content update for Real Chimes in the near future, so you can follow me on social media where I post about upcoming things like that, plus occasional sneak peeks of devlogs if you want to know more. If you want to check out my app for yourself, you can find Real Chimes on the app and Play stores. It would also help support me, which would just be so cool. That's all for now. Please like the video if you did, subscribe if you want more, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.